Welcome to Convertible Conversations today. So glad that you could join me. Sometimes when I talk to people about grace and try to explain to them about God's unconditional love and Jesus' finished work at the cross for everyone, people say, well, but we still have to do what Jesus said. Like we have to do what the words in the red letters that Jesus said, we still have to obey that. We still have to do all of that. And I say, well, like which ones? And they'll list some things. And I'll say, okay, well, what about where Jesus says, if you ever have a lustful thought, you should pluck your right eye out? Or if you've ever stolen anything, like even a paper clip from work, you should cut your right hand off. Or if you haven't totally forgiven somebody, then God won't forgive you. What about those? And people have a hard time explaining that. And I'm not making fun of them. I'm saying all this to make a point. We need to understand that when Jesus was here on earth, which was the greatest present we could ever have, God coming to be with us to show us what God is really like, Jesus had a twofold mission while he was here, a dual track ministry that he did both at the same time. One was to raise the ante of the law, which the Jews were under, and he was the one that he ministered to. Part of it was to raise the ante of the law so high that even the super religious Pharisees who thought they'd kept all of God's laws and were perfect, even those people would go, well, nobody can do that. And that's what he did when he said, if you even have a lustful thought, you should pluck your eye out. I don't think there's any recorded instance in history of anybody ever plucking their eye out because they had a lustful thought. Well, that's just indicative of the way Jesus raised the standard, raised the bar of the law so high that people could finally understand its original intent of, oh, no one can do that. No one can keep the law, all the law, perfectly. Well, while Jesus was doing that at the same time, he was preparing people for the new covenant of grace, which would supersede and replace the old covenant of the law. So the way Jesus actually lived and treated people, and the things that he said to people in his interpersonal relationships, were all under grace. For example, the famous story of the woman who was set up by the religious leaders to trick Jesus. They didn't care at all about her. They wanted to trick him. They set her up to be caught in the very act of adultery. And their law said that if someone is caught, man or woman, is caught in the act of adultery, they literally should be stoned to death right when they're caught. Don't mess around, no trial, nothing. Stone them to death. Well, they brought this woman to Jesus in front of everybody in the temple, and they said, Master, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. What do you say that we should do? Well, they were trying to trick him. And so what Jesus said is, eventually, he said, if anybody's without sin, let him cast the first stone. And of course, they all went away from the youngest to the oldest. So, or the other way around, the oldest to the youngest. But at any rate, Jesus was saying, I don't do what the law says. I don't do what your law says to do. I give grace. And he said to the woman, hey, where are your condemners? She said, they're all gone. He said, I don't condemn you. And he was the only one who legitimately could. He said, go. And most versions say he said, go and sin no more. He could have said that. It actually looks more like, in the actual text, what he said was, go, your sin has no more control over you, which is, of course, what he made possible for us. So, at any rate, Jesus had a dual track. He raised the ante of the law so much that people could see there's no way they could do it, and at the same time, he lived and ministered and interacted and gave grace to people. Unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness and mercy. And he was preparing people for the time would come when at his death he would totally fulfill the law, do away with it, and usher in the new covenant of grace, which is what we live under now. You live under grace. You and I live under grace. Everybody on the face of the earth has since Jesus finished work at the cross 2,000 years ago. It's a free gift. It's a gift of grace. There's nothing we could do to earn it. It was actually given to us before we were born, and it's absolutely wonderful. So what God is saying to me more and more every day is, hey, now you know this. Live like that. Feel free. I mean, you are free. Live free. Like New Hampshire's saying, live free or die. Jesus is saying, hey, I died for you so you can live free. live under grace knowing that everything's taken care of, there's no pressure, I did it all. Boy, when I remember that, life is really, really enjoyable. And it should be all the time. That's what he wants for us. Hope this is helpful. See you next time. Bye-bye.